Well, as the conflict in Ukraine rages on, Russians are dealing with some hefty international sanctions levied against the country. Now, almost immediately after the invasion of Ukraine, Western nations halted trade with Russia, and many corporations, well, they pulled out of the country entirely. But the sanctions seem to be having little effect right now. For more, I want to bring in Jacob Kirkegaard. He's a senior fellow with the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Thanks for joining us. I appreciate you being here. So what do we know about the state of the Russian economy right now? We heard a lot about these sanctions hurting folks in Russia initially, but now it seems the tide may have turned. What's the latest?
Well, I think, first of all, there's a lot of focus on the rebound of the Russian ruble. It has strengthened a lot since the sanctions were introduced. I, however, believe that that's kind of a false flag in a way, because the ruble is no longer convertible. So the exchange rate is rather meaningless. So what we do know is that Russian domestic logistics are in a shambles. Russian railways, Russian domestic airfare, airlines, etc. They're missing spare parts, etc., which is a big deal in a country as big as Russia with relatively limited road transportation. We know, obviously, that lots of Western companies have left Russia. The Russian middle class no longer have access to the kind of goods and services that they usually have. But it is true that the Russian government still has access to a lot of foreign exchange earnings from energy sales around the world.
Okay, and that was leading to my next question here. I mean, if Russia's doing okay right now, how is it able to survive financially despite these sanctions? It must be the oil.
Well, it's a combination of, record high oil prices and the fact that they can still sell. I mean, they still sell a lot of gas also to Europe. We have to remember that. They sell a lot of oil on global markets. But Russia also did have, going into this war, even if some of their foreign exchange reserves were frozen or have been frozen, they still had quite a bit of a reserve fund that they have been using. So in that sense, they were, I wouldn't call it well prepared given the scale of the sanctions, but they certainly have shown some resilience. And it's also the case that the Russian government has immediately now begun shifting to a sort of economic strategy of import substitution, relying more on local products. This will be hard in the long run, I would contend, but in the short run, you can, if you like, stabilize the average Russian's standard of living.
So who's being hit the hardest? People are feeling the impact of this war around the world. Americans right now, we're watching prices increase across the board. We're seeing those high gas prices every time we fill up our cars. How much are these sanctions really impacting us here at home?
Well, there's no doubt that these sanctions have been a contributing factor to record high oil prices and energy prices, and increasingly also food commodity prices around the world. And this is being felt, certainly here in the United States, and perhaps more ominously also on the food side in many poorer countries in Africa and the Middle East, where you have an increased risk of famine, etc. But I would still contend that by far the people that have been hurt the most by these sanctions are average Russians. It is true, yes, the Russian government itself is still managing, but the average Russian's living standard has been dramatically curtailed. I mean, Russian car sales have essentially dropped to zero. They can no longer travel virtually anywhere, certainly not in the West. Yes, we're feeling it here in the United States, but compared to those directly impacted, it's quite frankly not at the same extent.
Right. So the country of Russia still has money. The citizens of Russia are having a hard time right now. Jacob Kirkegaard, thank you for joining us today.